What's going on, people? We are Tottenham TV back here for some more content for you guys, and what we're going to be looking at today is analysing that top four race and telling you why Tottenham are now favourites for that top four. Obviously, Spurs did just beat Aston Villa 4-0 in that big clash last weekend. Man United also considered in the race at this point, but now we're going to be looking into the stats and why Spurs are favourites now.
Yeah, so the Opta analyst has done a really great article, like breaking down the top four race, analysing the fixture schedule for the whole Premier League, calculating who has the toughest schedule, and also they've done kind of a percentage chance of who they think is most likely to finish in the top four. So it is really interesting drilling into kind of the data and how they've come to their conclusions. But looking at it, we're going to explain why we believe, and Opta, I've said Spurs are favourites for top four. And it's very important we get into that top four because given, some of the English teams' struggles at the moment in Europe, there is no guarantee at the moment that fifth place is going to be a Champions League spot, although at the moment that is still favourite to be a Champions League spot. But getting in that top four just assures that you're going to be in the Champions League next season. So if we can make that top four, it would be an incredible achievement for Ange in his first season. But let's look at the fixtures and we'll show you why Spurs at the moment do have the upper hand in that top four race.
Yeah, so if you bring up the graphic of the fixtures here, you can see it.
So how this works is Opta have analysed the fixture list for all 20 teams, and they've given a figure on the right-hand side you can see, which basically calculates the difficulty of the fixtures. They've rated each team, I believe, 1 to 100 I think it's in world football, but they basically, how they come to their conclusions, they give each team a value, and 100 being the most difficult team, 1 being like the worst team in Europe. And they've basically given an average of everyone's remaining fixtures for the last 10 games and given basically a figure of who has the most difficult fixtures. So as you can see at the moment, Brighton have the most difficult fixtures in the whole Premier League. They're on top of the list. But second, as you can see on screen, is Aston Villa with 89.7. But they have the second most difficult fixtures in the whole Premier League left in the remaining 10 games, with Spurs down in 9th, I believe, in the most difficult fixtures, with obviously Spurs and Aston Villa both having to play the top three remaining in the Premier League. Obviously, Spurs have City and Arsenal at home with Liverpool away. Aston Villa have City and Arsenal away with Liverpool at home. But I think crucially, Spurs, the last two games, play Burnley and Sheffield United. And Luton as well. So Spurs actually have the bottom three still to play in terms of difficulty of fixtures. You could argue, do you want to be playing the bottom teams? Some people say, you don't want to be playing teams who are facing relegation. But I guess a flip argument to that is they're bottom of the table for a reason. And it's probably best you want to play those kind of teams. With Aston Villa, I think the lowest ranking team they've got left to play is Brentford. At home, they've got Palace on the final day, but they don't really have the relegation candidates left to play. They've kind of played them already, and they've got a lot of the top 10 still to play as well. So if you're looking at their fixture list, even though Tottenham go for that really difficult run, Villa actually have the second hardest games left in the Premier League.
Yeah, they do. And I think a big difference from Spurs' and Aston Villa's fixtures are when you're looking at it, we both have Man City, Arsenal and Liverpool to play. But the difference is they have to go to both Man City and Arsenal and get results, and playing Liverpool at home, second last game of the season, which could be one of the most crunch games for Liverpool. And Spurs, we do have them all in a row, but it is much earlier on. And also we have Man City and Arsenal at home while going to Anfield. So I think that also plays into why Aston Villa do have more difficult fixtures than us. But you're also looking at Manchester United. They've got statistically the easiest fixtures out of all three. So is there a case saying Man United could creep through the back door here?
Potentially. I mean, I think maybe could be more from Villa's point of view. From a Spurs fan's point of view, I'm thinking that I'm hoping we'll finish above Man United, but obviously they got to be taken into account considering they got no Europe and they do have the easiest run left, and obviously they've last season, I believe, second half of the season, I think they went on I can't remember if they went on a decent run, but they did get top 4. They ended up, getting over the line. So maybe they could use that experience to kind of go on a run over the last 10 games or so. We know Ten Hag is really battling for his job as well. They did win their last game at home to Everton. Will that give them a bit of momentum? But given the fact that I believe that's the 13th easiest set of fixtures they have, maybe there's a late twist as well for Man United. If they'll be looking at this fixtures and thinking, we do have the easiest fixtures, and if we can really go on a run now and put pressure on Spurs and Aston Villa, maybe we can spring a surprise late in that top 4 race. The problem with Man United is, do they have that consistent form in them to go on a run like that? They haven't really shown it all season, whereas I feel like Villa and Spurs have gone on runs in certain parts of the season where you've really felt like, okay, that they've got that consistency. I haven't really seen that for Man United throughout the whole season, have we?
I mean, you did see it recently when Rasmus Højlund was banging the goals. They were getting consistent results there. Maybe not playing consistently well, but definitely getting consistent. I think they went on 4 wins in a row or something like that. Was it 3 or 4 wins in a row for Man U when Rasmus was just smashing them in? Their form has curtailed since he's got injured, but he is on his way back now, and I think he's just been called up for the Denmark squad, or he's been deemed fit or well within the squad for the next couple of weeks. So there is a possibility, if you've got a striker like that in that kind of form, it can get you out of trouble if you're not playing well. So I think it could be a slight danger, but I look at Man United and I look at the way they're playing, and I don't have any faith that they're going to finish in the top 4 or even in the top 5. So I'm looking at it, and I do think it's a straight shootout between Tottenham and Aston Villa. I do think over the next kind of 4 games, it could split the difference when you're looking at Spurs going to Fulham, Luton at home, West Ham away, Forest at home. And Aston Villa got to go to West Ham as well, Wolves at home, Man City away, Brentford at home, and then they got to go to Arsenal away as well. So I do think before Spurs' hard run, we could put ourselves a bit of a gap between us and Aston Villa, and I think that could even be the decider already that early on.
Yeah, and what's interesting as well, if it is still very close going into after Tottenham's really hard run, we play the top 3. If it is kind of still close going after that run, in the last 2 games, Villa have Liverpool at home and Palace away in the last 2 games, whereas Spurs have Burnley at home and Sheffield United away. So Spurs really have a really favourable last couple of games.
They'll probably be down by then as well.
Yeah, you would think so. Mathematically, you would think they'll probably be down at that point. So those are two real games where Tottenham will be expected to get 6 points, whereas Villa could easily drop points to a Liverpool team, could be still in the title race, and obviously a Palace team getting to grips with life under Oli Glasner as well. That won't be an easy game going away at Palace on the final day of the season. They'll want a good performance to go into the new season under a new manager. Maybe Elise might be back for that game as well. So even if Villa kind of stay ahead or somehow ahead of us, going to those last couple games, there's still a chance Tottenham can overcome them in those last 2 games. What's also quite interesting is maybe looking at Arsenal's tough run in, because even though Tottenham have to play the top 3, according to this, statistically, Arsenal have the 5th hardest run-in left in the league. Obviously, in the title race, that might serve them potentially badly. It's quite interesting to think they have that hard of a run-in, considering statistically a harder run-in than Spurs, considering Tottenham still have to play the top 3 in the Premier League. And as we've said before, if Tottenham beat Fulham and Luton, then Arsenal will go into that City away game with only a 5-point gap between Spurs and Arsenal. So that'll be quite interesting if Tottenham do get into that position with a 5-point gap, with the rest of the season still to play, where that takes us.
Absolutely. You look at Arsenal's fixtures and all their away games seems to be hard. Every single one. Man City away next. Brighton away. They have only lost 1 game at home all season. Wolves away, which is always a tricky game for the top sides. And then they finish off
then Spurs
away and Manchester United away. So historically, they don't do well at Spurs and Man United. And maybe this season will be different because of the way Arsenal are playing. But on paper, none of those fixtures look easy, do they?
No, they don't. So but as well, especially in the terms of the title race, they definitely have the hardest fixtures. You can see Man United and Liverpool kind of around mid-table for their Man City and Liverpool around mid-table for their fixture difficulty, whereas Arsenal quite near the top. So it'd be interesting if they have have to balance Champions League football with that league campaign, and obviously they have to split their resources between both competitions. And will they be able to keep up that momentum in the league if they're focused on the Champions League? That could be something interesting to look at when it comes to kind of the end of season running, especially if Tottenham pick up more points than expected in that really hard run in April.
I would say as though it looks like from this graph that they haven't taken into account Spurs' game in hand against Chelsea.
Correct.
So that would be a dark red, probably. Maybe not with the form Chelsea are showing, but maybe Spurs' history at Stamford Bridge.
But what this graph essentially, what it's not taken into account that extra game. I think extra game in hand because I think they said first of all it hasn't been scheduled, and secondly that they basically said like that game in hand would just be a bonus on top of whatever this graph shows. So if Spurs can basically overcome, like let's say Villa within this graph, then whatever we get at Chelsea would just be a bonus on top of that rather than anything else, if you know what I mean. And
also when you're analysing the last couple of games of the season, as much as we're saying Man U statistically from Opta have the easiest games of the season, I mean, look at that end to the season. Palace away, Arsenal at home and Brighton away. It's not exactly easy games, is it?
Yeah, those are the really tough run in right at the end.
So I really think if these last two games could be vital for Spurs if it's not wrapped up before then. You go into those last two games, I mean, where have you seen it before? Spurs needing a victory against a relegated side to get top four before.
Yeah, seen it a couple of times, I think.
For Son to get the golden boot as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, looking at that gives me a lot of encouragement that Tottenham could really get in that top four. And also, you've got to take into account the fact we've now getting our players back. Obviously, we've got that really big confidence-boosting win away at Aston Villa last time out.
Best performance of the season.
We don't have European distractions, separating so we don't have to split our resources between multiple competitions. We literally have one game a week, focusing on each game week by week, having certain plans, and we're looking fresh and confident now. Obviously we can't take our foot off the pedal and can't take anything for granted just after that win, and I hope the players don't take their eye off the ball. But you see with Villa, John McGinn's getting sent off, that they're struggling in Europe at the moment. They got a 0-0 draw away at Ajax, where it was a kind of a grueling game. They had to put a lot of energy into that game, and they seem to that game against Spurs might have dealt them a big psychological blow, whereas Spurs kind of looking on the up. Everyone's kind of got a family feel at the moment. Not to say Villa haven't had that for a lot of the season. They're doing very well, but just the circumstance of the season at the moment, Tottenham seem to be hopefully on the up going into that final stretch, whereas Villa, are you not as confident that they're going to go into those final 10 games in that kind of form?
Yeah, true. The way I'm looking at it though is like these first 4 games and the last 2 games, we have to get close to maximum points out of those games, and then anything we get in that hard run can be a bonus, because I think if we do get what I'm saying is maximum in these 4 and the last 2, not maximum but very close to, then I do think that it will be very much ours to lose, and it will only be a massive drop-off in those 4 games to lose it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what Villa will be looking at. They'll be looking at that hard running because they do have hard games, so maybe they're a bit more spread out, they would argue. Maybe having them back to back. You could look at it 2 ways, having those games in a row, because obviously if you lose the first one, maybe that momentum starts to go against you, and then having another fixture as difficult as that the following week could all of a sudden spiral. But if you do get a positive result, we've seen that momentum can really carry you going into the next week, and all of a sudden you're fearing no one. I remember that run under Harry Redknapp where we had Chelsea and Arsenal within I think 4 days, and because we beat Arsenal, we just took that momentum into the next game and beat Chelsea, and it really carried us.
Say that though, but we just lost the FA Cup semi-final to Portsmouth a few days before that, so I mean, like, we were going into the Chelsea game with actually low momentum, and we seemed to drag ourselves up for those 2 games.
Yeah. I'm saying that positive momentum we got from that Arsenal win probably carried us into that Chelsea win, and they were 2 teams at the time both going for the title, I remember, and they were 2 obviously very, very good teams, but because we were just full of confidence after that win against Arsenal, we then went, and same with Villa, we saw it with them, they beat City, and because they just got that massive boost, a few days later they went and beat Arsenal at home as well. So it just shows how powerful momentum can be in football. So you can kind of look at it 2 ways in that tough run, whether you'd want it back to back or whether you'd want it spread out like Villa's fixtures.
I like it back to back. I think whenever Spurs are against the wall like that in back to back games, I think we actually surprise a few people. When we're the underdogs as well, we a lot of the time we surprise people, especially at home. So I like these fixtures all in a row. But like I said, get a lot of points, get maximum or close to maximum points in these next 4 games, and that puts us massive favourites in my opinion.
Yeah,
massive. But let's look at the next graph. This is the probability of finishing in the top 4 throughout the season. So what can you tell me from this?
So what Opta have done in this graph have basically ran a simulation 10,000 times for all the fixtures in the Premier League, and they've given a percentage of how often Tottenham end up finishing in the top 4, how often Villa finishing from this position with the fixtures left remaining, how often each team ends up finishing in the top 4. So as the graph shows, in 2.3% of times Man United end up finishing in the top 4. In 42.2% of times Villa end up finishing in the top 4. Now it calculates Tottenham have a 55% chance of finishing inside the top 4. But as you can see, they've kind of plotted this graph throughout the season. What's really interesting is you can see there around January 1st time, Aston Villa had a close to 80% chance of finishing the top 4, with Tottenham as low in the December time as low as about 13%, as you can see on the graph there, of finishing the top 4. But that momentum has really changed in the last few weeks. Obviously, there's been a bit of a yo-yo around the beginning of February. And even as far as 2 weeks ago, you could see Aston Villa had a near 70% chance of finishing top 4. But now it's completely flipped, especially that win against Aston Villa. Tottenham now, for the first time, I think it says here, for the first time probably since early February, they're now clear favourites to finish in that top 4, which hasn't been the case. But it's crazy to think how it swung. As you can see, that run we had in the first 10 games, that Chelsea game, you can literally see where it changed. That on the 1st November, which was Chelsea, Tottenham had, as you can see there, about a 70% chance of finishing top 4. And there's literally been a sharp decline from that Chelsea game all the way to mid-January, where we had about 13% chance of finishing top 4. And now at this point, it's 55% given the calculation. So definitely moving in the right direction, and it's moving in the right direction exactly the right time for us.
Yeah, it's just a shame that what happened in that Chelsea game did happen, because we might be sitting here thinking what percentages we've got winning the title this year instead of actually getting top 4. But obviously it didn't work out that way. I think Spurs, when you look at Spurs and Villa this season, forget all the stats and everything like that, but purely on the eye test, I do think Spurs have looked a better side.
I just think we have a more sustainable way of playing, a more sustainable way of controlling games. Villa have been brilliant, don't get me wrong, but they rely on certain aspects. They're very tactical in a sense that they rely on a very intense way of playing. They rely on opposition doing certain things, and I feel like Spurs very much rely on themselves, very much look to control games themselves and control the elements of football and concentrate on in possession, whereas Aston Villa a lot of the time can rely on transitional based moments where they make the most of, and they're very good at doing it, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like the way Spurs play is going to be more sustainable over a longer period of time to control games and getting results, and that's what I'm hoping plays into our favour going to this last stretch of games.
Yeah, and also you look at the injuries that Spurs have had and the injuries that Villa have had. We've had key players out for a big sustained amount of time when you're talking about from that Chelsea game till very recently. Yes, Villa have had their own injury problems, but it's been nowhere close to what Spurs have had to deal with. Let's be honest, we're here. So, and
also, we were missing Son for how many games? 5 games,
yeah. And Papsar, who was also very important
and
to us.
I think Watkins has Watkins played every game this season. I don't think he's
more or less. Yeah,
imagine Watkins missed a stretch of 5 games. How would they have done in that kind of period?
Exactly.
I don't know.
And they've had Watkins all this time, and they're starting to drop points to the likes of Sheffield United and these kind of teams at home. I know we ran it closer with Sheffield United even when we had our first team, but I think the point still stands where, yeah, they went 17 games at home with a win, but now I think they're like 1 win in 6 or 2 wins in 7 or something like that at home. So you're looking at Spurs and Villa, and I do think, hand on heart, that Spurs are the better team here.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen it with Unai Emery many times in his career where they start with a good league campaign, and then once they go deep in Europe and their focus shifts, the league results start to suffer. And I don't know if that's what's happening here, but history would suggest that is something that's happened very, very often with Unai Emery. It's something Jamie Carragher pointed out on Monday Night Football, how he kind of, when the European games start to get into crunch time, he starts to tinker a lot with his tactics and doesn't go with what was working throughout the season. And it changes to a kind of muddled sense of identity. Whereas Villa in the early part of the season, you knew how they were going to play. You kind of knew how they were going to set up, especially at home. They would really go for teams. And maybe on Sunday against when Spurs played at Villa Park, that was kind of evidence of Unai Emery starting to overthink things again. And is that going to come back to bite him? We'll have to wait and see.
I think we all said it, even like from the first 10 games, 15 games of the season, when Villa were like only a few points off the top. We kind of all predicted, not just us, but everyone probably that has channels or anyone analysing the game, all predicted that Aston Villa will drop off at some point. And I think that's what you're seeing now. And I think it's also down to experience as well. You look at all the teams that are up there, everyone have kind of been up there before. They know how to do it. Spurs have got top four so many times now. We're not that team anymore that keep failing to get top four and haven't done it. How many times have we been in the Champions League with fights to the death to get top four? So many times now. And I think experience is going to go a long way. As much as I think we're betting them, I think the experience will stand us in that good stead as well, where you look at Aston Villa, they were going on about that Tottenham game being the biggest game in recent history in the league for Aston Villa, and look how it got to their heads. Look how it got to John McGinn's head, their captain. So I think experience definitely goes a long way in these races as well.
Now, here's a question with obviously 153 points with 11 games to go, with 33 points to play for. How many points do you reckon Spurs get from now to the end of the season? First of all, you reckon probably 70 should be enough for top four. Do you see Villa hitting the 70 mark? Although they're only 15 points away from it, that's 5 wins.
I reckon the games that will drop, I think potentially a draw at West Ham, potentially a draw or loss at Newcastle, loss at Anfield.
I reckon we might beat Newcastle,
Yeah, we might, but I'm just trying to be like conservative a bit. One of Man City or Arsenal, I reckon we draw. And then Chelsea could be a draw or a loss as well.
So that's 4 games you're saying we drop points?
Yeah, and I think it's enough.
So that'll be 6 wins. That'll be 6 wins would be in 11 games. That'll be 18 points, which would put us on 71. That'll be enough for top 4.
Yeah.
That'd be enough for top 4.
What else are you looking at? What else are you looking at?
That's probably right. But I think if we would manage to get more than 71 points, that'd be an incredible achievement in Ange's
Of course it would. Of course
even,
it would.
Even 71 by itself.
How many points did we get when we beat Norwich last game of the season with Conte?
That was around 71, 72, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's usually the benchmark for top 4. So 6 wins essentially is what we're saying.
And I think
is what we need. And I do think I can see those 6 wins in that run.
And I think if you look at it, if Spurs do go on and do that, 71, 72 points come the end of the season, what a building block that gives Ange to go into the summer with and go into next season with. But there is an argument to say right now, is Europa League better for Spurs at this moment of where we are in this development? Is Europa League to go into next season a tournament where we can bed in some of the youngsters for next season, gives us more of a rotation, a basis for rotation, and also a competition that we can realistically win?
Is it better to be in Europa League?
It's obviously not better to be in Europa League, but is it more, I don't know what the word is. Is it better for us to be in Europa League in terms of the club?
Well, you saw what it did, like when we beat Arsenal to top 4. You saw what happened the next season. They were in Europa League, but they really kicked on and went and got into a title race, whereas we faltered and ended up finishing 8th. They didn't give us any help.
I don't think that was because they got Europa League and because we got Champions League. I think that's just because of how both owners kind of reacted to the situations. I don't think that was because of that situation. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it would be in Europa League be better for our. You always kind of, as football fans, think of projects. You want to take it step by step, getting to the next step. And would getting Champions League in our first season be jumping ahead of the project? You could argue that. You could argue with Newcastle this season. Did getting Champions League in a way hinder them because they jumped a step in their project. And this season, they couldn't really keep up with both things.
I think it was just injuries for Newcastle. Like they got pretty much more injuries than us that and for a longer sustained amount of time as well. Like I think that's what really hurt Newcastle this season. I don't think it was Champions League football.
So on that front, I don't think it matters.
I'm talking about a competition.
No,
where
because circumstance just dictates. It doesn't really, you can't really tell what circumstance are coming. You know what I mean?
I'm talking about a competition that we can realistically go out there and win next season in Europa League. What a season it would be if we could lift the trophy next season. Europa League is a great tournament to win. And also it gives development to the players coming through. Lucas Bergvall coming in next season, potentially Jamie Donnelly and all these kind of players. Like I very much doubt like a Jamie Donnelly will get a start in the Champions League next season.
Mm-hmm. But you got to playing against the best to know where you're at, and if you can get to the Champions League, you get to it can accelerate the process even more because you see where the players are at against the best opposition, rather than just against Europa League. As much as Europa League would be a good competition to be in and win, being in the Champions League, that sets the bar at that level. If we do well in Europa League, just because a player does well in Europa League, does that mean they're good enough for us? If you know what I mean. Whereas if they're doing well in the Champions League, that's a different kettle of fish. That accelerates the process.
But they might not get their opportunity in the Champions League is what I'm saying, where they would most likely get their opportunity in the Europa League.
Well, that's the standard. We want to be good enough for Champions League.
But these players are just coming through like 18, 19 years of age.
Well, they need loan deals.
Yeah.
That's the reality. I'd rather be in the Champions League.
Of course, yeah. Look, I would rather be in the Champions League as well, but I can definitely see big values of being in the Europa League next season as well.
Yeah, there's values of it, but I think there's more value being in the Champions League.
Well, let us know in the comment section below. That is the reason why Spurs are favourites for top 4. Do you see the values of being in the Europa League, or do you think that it's got to be the Champions League for next season? I think when you're looking at it right now, it is very much likely that we're in the Champions League. So it probably is a mute conversation or a mute debate. But let us know in the comment section below your thoughts on the matter. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, come on you Spurs.